"We don't allow people of your kind in here," was the racist remark made by the landlord. How will the Black Marcus family handle this situation? Let's dive into the story and learn what happened. If you believe in equality, make sure to comment down below where you are watching from. The sun dipped low over the city skyline, casting long shadows across the bustling streets. The air was thick with the hum of life. Cars honking, people chatting, and the occasional bark of a dog. In the heart of the city stood a towering apartment building, its glass windows gleaming in the fading light. The building, known as the Crestwood, was a symbol of luxury and exclusivity. Its sleek design and prime location made it one of the most sought-after addresses in the city. But beneath its polished exterior, something far less glamorous was brewing. Inside the building's leasing office, a man in his late 50s sat behind a large mahogany desk. His name was Richard Grayson, the property manager of the Crestwood. Richard prided himself on maintaining the building's reputation for exclusivity. To him, that meant keeping out undesirables, a term he used liberally to describe anyone who didn't fit his idea of the perfect tenant. His office was immaculate, with plush leather chairs, a polished floor, and a large window that offered a view of the city. But the atmosphere was anything but welcoming. Richard leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled as he eyed the family standing before him. The Johnsons, Marcus, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a calm demeanor. His wife, Evelyn, a woman whose quiet elegance spoke volumes. And their two young children, a boy and a girl, who stood quietly by their parents' side. The family had come to inquire about renting one of the building's spacious three-bedroom apartments. But Richard's expression was anything but welcoming. "I'm sorry," Richard said, his tone dripping with condescension, "but I don't think this is the right place for your family." Marcus raised an eyebrow, his voice steady. "And why is that?" Richard hesitated for a moment, his mind racing for an excuse. "Well, you see," he began, his tone patronizing, "this building caters to a very specific type of tenant. We have certain standards, and I'm just not sure your family would be a good fit." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, but she remained silent, her hand resting gently on her daughter's shoulder. Marcus, however, wasn't about to let it slide. "Standards?" he repeated, his tone calm but firm. "What kind of standards are we talking about?" Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Well, you know," he said vaguely, waving a hand in the air. "We have a certain image to maintain. Our tenants are, well, they're not like you." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. "Not like us?" he asked, his voice low. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Richard's face flushed, but he doubled down. "Look," he said, his tone growing sharper. "I'm just trying to be honest with you. This building isn't for everyone. And frankly, I don't think your family would be happy here. It's better if you look somewhere else." The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus and Evelyn exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between them. They had faced discrimination before, but this was different. This wasn't just about being turned away. It was about the blatant disrespect, the assumption that they didn't belong. Marcus took a step forward, his voice calm, but carrying an undeniable edge. "Mr. Grayson," he said, his tone measured, "I think you're making a mistake." Richard scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "A mistake," he repeated, his tone mocking. "I don't think so. I know exactly what I'm doing. And I'm doing what's best for this building." Marcus's eyes narrowed, but he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He typed something quickly, then set the phone back down on the desk. The gesture was simple, but it carried an unspoken weight that made Richard's confidence waver. "What are you doing?" Richard asked, his tone sharp. Marcus didn't answer. Instead, he turned to his family. "Let's go," he said quietly. "We'll find somewhere else." Evelyn nodded, her expression calm but resolute. She took her children's hands and followed Marcus out of the office, leaving Richard sitting at his desk, his unease growing with every passing second. As the Johnsons walked down the hallway, Marcus pulled out his phone again and made a quick call. "It's me," he said quietly. "We're ready to proceed." The person on the other end of the line responded, their voice calm but firm. "Understood. We'll handle it from here." Marcus hung up and slipped the phone back into his pocket. He glanced at Evelyn, who gave him a small, knowing smile. The two of them had been through a lot together, and they knew how to handle situations like this. But this time, it was different. This time, they had the upper hand. Back in the leasing office, Richard sat at his desk, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had made a mistake, but he couldn't quite put his finger on why. He tried to brush it off, telling himself that he had done the right thing. But deep down, he knew something was off. The next morning, Richard arrived at the building early, as he always did. He liked to be the first one in, to make sure everything was in order before the day began. But as he stepped into the lobby, he noticed something unusual. A group of people were gathered near the front desk, their expressions serious. Among them was Marcus Johnson. Richard's heart skipped a beat, but he tried to remain calm. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone polite but wary. Marcus stepped forward, his expression calm but firm. "Mr. Grayson," he said, his voice steady. "I believe you've met my wife, Evelyn, and our children." Richard's eyes darted to Evelyn, who stood quietly beside Marcus, her arms crossed. He swallowed hard, his mind racing. "Yes, of course," he said, his tone strained. "What can I do for you?" Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys. He held them up, the metal glinting in the light. "These," he said, his tone calm but carrying an undeniable weight, "are the keys to the building." Richard's eyes widened, his face draining of color. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus's expression didn't change. "As of this morning," he said, his voice steady, "my family and I are the new owners of the Crestwood." The words hit Richard like a ton of bricks. He staggered back, his mind reeling. "That's impossible," he said, his voice shaking. "This building isn't for sale." Marcus tilted his head slightly, his gaze steady. "It was," he said simply, "and now it's ours." Richard's knees felt weak, and he reached out to steady himself against the desk. His mind raced, trying to process what was happening. He had been so sure of himself, so confident in his authority. But now, in the span of a few moments, everything had changed. Marcus stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. "Mr. Grayson," he said, his tone measured, "your services are no longer required." Richard's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He looked around the lobby, his eyes darting from face to face. The other employees stood silently, their expressions a mix of shock and relief. It was clear that no one was going to come to his defense. Marcus turned to the group of people standing nearby. "Please escort Mr. Grayson out," he said, his tone calm, but carrying an undeniable authority. Two security guards stepped forward, their expressions serious. They took Richard by the arms and began to lead him toward the door. Richard struggled, his face red with anger and humiliation. "You can't do this," he shouted, his voice echoing through the lobby. "I've worked here for years. You can't just fire me." Marcus didn't respond. Instead, he watched as Richard was escorted out of the building, his expression calm but resolute. When the doors closed behind Richard, the lobby fell silent. Marcus turned to the employees who had gathered nearby. "I want to assure you all," he said, his voice steady, "that this building will be run differently from now on. We believe in treating everyone with respect and dignity, no matter who they are or where they come from. If anyone has a problem with that, they're welcome to leave." The employees nodded, their expressions a mix of relief and admiration. It was clear that a new era had begun at the Crestwood. As the days turned into weeks, the changes at the Crestwood became evident. The building, once a symbol of exclusivity and elitism, was now a beacon of inclusivity and respect. Marcus and Evelyn worked tirelessly to ensure that every tenant and employee felt valued and respected. They implemented new policies, held regular meetings, and made it clear that discrimination of any kind would not be tolerated. The tenants, many of whom had witnessed Richard's behavior firsthand, were quick to embrace the changes. They praised Marcus and Evelyn for their leadership and commitment to creating a welcoming environment. The building's reputation began to shift, and soon, the Crestwood was known not just for its luxury, but for its sense of community and fairness. As for Richard, he found himself struggling to come to terms with what had happened. He had always prided himself on his ability to maintain control, but now he was left with nothing. His attempts to find another job were met with resistance, as word of his behavior at the Crestwood spread. He was a man who had once held power, but now he was a cautionary tale. One evening, as Marcus and Evelyn sat in their new apartment, overlooking the city skyline, they reflected on everything that had happened. It had been a long journey, but they had come out stronger on the other side. "Do you think we made the right decision?" Evelyn asked, her voice soft. Marcus nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I do," he said. "This wasn't just about us. It was about setting an example, about showing that everyone deserves to be treated with respect." Evelyn smiled, her hand resting gently on his. "I'm proud of us," she said. "We stood up for what we believed in, and we made a difference." Marcus nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "We did," he said, "and this is just the beginning." As the city lights twinkled in the distance, Marcus and Evelyn knew that they had started something important. They had turned a moment of injustice into a powerful lesson, one that would ripple far beyond the walls of the Crestwood. And as they sat together, hand in hand, they felt a quiet sense of triumph, a triumph that no amount of prejudice or discrimination could ever shake.